Yes, so thanks, Howard, and thanks everyone for joining this session. I'm from the threat hunting team, and Asaf here with me is from the threat intelligence team. We're usually working together on a daily basis, but today we want to present an interesting collaboration between the teams during an attack. So our agenda for today, we will go through the background of this session. We will talk about incident response flow. Also, we will talk about the challenges as a threat hunter and also as a CTI analyst. We will talk about two main tactics in ransomware: initial access and data exfiltration. And in the end, we will talk about the takeaways from this session, and we will have time for questions. So in this session, we will present and also explain how CTI and threat hunting efforts help IR teams to handle incidents. If we will look into an incident, in our case, we will focus on ransomware incidents. So the first and also the closest layer to the incident itself is an IR team, but also CTI and threat hunting adding their enrichment to the IR teams. And today we will show you how it works. Recently, Asaf and I participated in a real ransomware incident, and we would like to share with you our experience and our work processes. So here you can see an IR incident handling flow. Basically, incident starts from the discovery of the incident, and usually it happens by L1 teams. And the end of an attack is when it's prevented. The threat hunting and CTI efforts are mainly focused on the investigation stage. Of course, not only at this stage we have efforts by the threat hunting and the CTI, but in this session we will focus on the investigation stage. We want to understand the ransomware variant family, the attack vector, and also to understand the scope of the attack. We will extract in this stage meaningful indicators, and then we can use them to scan our entire internal network to continue with additional containment activities. Also, by identification the ransomware variant, we could define the type of the ransomware, and sometimes it's possible to get a decryption key for the encrypted files.
All right, thanks, Karina, and thanks everyone for joining today's session. We now want to discuss about the challenges which both teams, CTI and threat hunting teams, face when investigating a ransomware incident. So let's start with the CTI aspect. First, you need to know that during ransomware investigation, CTI team usually encounter with multiple potential leads and background noises. You need to know some of them are planted in purpose by the attackers to distract and slow down the incident investigation and remediation. And therefore, CTI teams should be very focused and work via predefined strategy when handling such attack. Moving forward, so there are several challenges in investigating today's ransomware incident that stem from the fact that these attacks operate in the complex and dynamic ransomware as a service model. And let's understand what is it about this model that make it so challenging to investigate. So first, initial access, the way that the attacker gaining the access into the network varies from attack to attack, basically because of the infrastructure and the stakeholders in the ransomware service operation. We're going to elaborate a bit about this in the next slides. Another challenge is that unlike all the ransomware operations, ransomware as a service attacks are not fully automated and are operated by humans who make decisions in the real time. This basically means that the attacker has more time to think twice before taking any action and invest more effort in remaining under the radar and evade detection. Finally, as part of ransomware as a service operation, attackers usually utilize unique payloads and network infrastructure against each target. This means that implementing indicator of compromise associated with the ransomware group or a previous attack won't be enough to protect an organization against a ransomware attack. This is also why it's so crucial to rely the detection and prevention activities on indicator of attacks, IOAs, and not only on specific IOC. And now we can move to the threat hunting challenges.
So as a threat hunter, our challenges are to do fast and also a focused hunt. During an incident, we want to hunt for different techniques in a short time because we have many log sources and also many different leads, and the hunts could be unfocused and too wide and also to take more time. If I have some leads or behaviors that are associated with the attack, at least I know where to start my hunting. It's difficult to identify all the endpoints that have been infected, and especially if we have limited visibility. If I know the techniques that were used by the attacker, it will help me then to understand the scope of the attack. For example, what the techniques the attacker used. For example, if he used what technique he used for spreading. If we have network segmentation, so I will identify which endpoints are infected more easily. During the investigation, we need to identify step by step what happened during the attack. So now let's start with the investigation phase, and we will show you how we solve those challenges with collaboration between the teams.
So as we described, one of the challenges that both teams face during the investigation is to collect and translate external CTI leads, can be seen over the left, into internal focus and efficient hunting sessions. So CTI leads usually rely on external analysis and assessments, including multiple types of observable that might be involved in the attacks in some manner. This includes a vulnerable server or web application that might be the source of the attack, a list of targeted employees that could be the source of the attack, or CVE that is likely to be exploited. And this multiple types of observable actually raise another challenge, mainly of what specific action should be taken against each observable and which security system and log sources should be explored to assess the actual involvement of the leads in the attack. So connecting between CTI, external CTI leads into internal logs will assist in understanding the sequence of events during the attack and to eliminate the threat faster. So in the next slide, we're gonna expose some strategies and practices that should be taken by both teams to provide answer and connect between these dots when the time is actually short. All right, so one of the first areas that should be prioritized and explored by CTI team is to discover how the attackers actually gain access into the network. This understanding is crucial to ensure that the attacker won't be able to accelerate the network again and to conduct additional malicious actions. And need to say that discovering the initial access used in ransomware attacks is not always an easy task because unlike a traditional ransomware operation that were usually operated by a single threat group that leverage certain TTP and specific capabilities. So the ransomware as a service model consists of several types of threat actors, including one that is known as initial access broker. So this ransomware stakeholder work independently and responsible for gaining initial access into the corporate environments, and then they offer them for sale in underground communities and marketplaces. So the fact that initial access is actually gained separately by an independent threat actor create a situation where initial access vector varies from attack and dynamic. This means that CTI team should now focus their efforts the most common MITRE attack TTPs that are used to gain initial access as part of global ransomware operation. Because shifting our focus into a broader point of view that compares the most observed attack vector into actual facts on the ground will assist us in exposing potential weak spots that might be the source of the attack. So in front of you can see some of the most common initial access tactics in ransomware operation. As can be seen over the right, CTI team should always take into account that the attackers might utilize an unknown attack vector. This can be an unknown zero-day vulnerability or a new technique that was still undiscovered. So once covering this, we can now deep dive and discuss about the detection opportunities for each one of these tactics for both CTI and threat hunting aspects. So let's start. The first initial access technique we're going to discuss is external remote services. These services usually include RDP, SSH, and VPN solution, and usually used by organizations to access internal network resources from external location. This is actually why they're highly favored by threat actors as ransomware operators for the same reason. So it's important to keep in mind that large organizations that usually have thousands of endpoints and servers across the globe struggle to track and maintain their ever-changing public exposure. Attackers are aware of this fact and always try to exploit it. And during the reconnaissance phase, the attackers scan the internet and look for remote services which are affected by common security risks. This can be unrestricted port access, weak user signing credentials, or lack of SSO protection. And this is where CTI teams should adopt the same thinking and leverage public tools such as Shodan or Census to assess the potential risks. So a nice approach to conduct this type of searches is by using customized Shodan or Census queries, because querying this platform for specific responses that can link between an unknown server to the organization that was attacked can be efficient in detecting external weak spots that even the organization itself might not be aware of. So a nice example of such customized query can be seen in front of you. And as you can see, it is based on the server SSL certificate. Can you see in the down below example? This SSL certificate usually includes the organization name or some of the domain name within the subject common name, the CN field within the certificate. And this can assist us in finding this unfamiliar server. So once we detect an external facing remote service that might be the source of the attack, we can now provide Karina and the threat hunter with the IP address of the remote service for further analysis and internal hunting session. So let's see what Karina can do with this observable.
Thanks, Asaf. So attacks from external remote services could be quite difficult to detect because authentication to services almost always will look like a legitimate activity. However, we still have some couple of things to keep in mind when we want to hunt for such technique. We're taking the IP address of the RDP server that was provided by Asaf, and we want to hunt for all the suspicious inbound network communication. In this case, I will hunt for inbound communication because the server is publicly exposed, as Asaf explained about it. So I want to search who tried to communicate to this IP address. So let's start from the first log source, the firewall. The main purpose of firewall basically is to stop connections from suspicious network. It also inspects the source address, destination address, and the destination port for all the connections. And then it decides if the network could be trusted. So what should I look for? As I said, inbound communication with destination port 3389, the RDP port. Also, we can look for suspicious inbound or outbound activity that's also associated with this IP address. It's important to exclude all the internal subnets as a destination and also to filter them out, all the known client-owned external destinations, and because by taking this approach, we could find the suspicious IP. The next step will be extracting the IP, all the IPs that were communicated to this RDP server. As you can see here on the screen, I'm taking all the source IPs that I found and I'm validating them in the VT as shown in the example. Also, I can use the authentication logs and analyze for unusual access patterns, activities, or access outside of normal business hours. Authentication logs might be indicate about suspicious account activity. For instance, as I said, account might be detected logging outside of business hours. or multiple accounts that are logged into the system in the same time also could be a red flag. Shared accounts such as user admin and service accounts should be always be monitored for suspicious activities. Then, as a last step, we will correlate the security information between the events we found in order to extract the user that was involved in those events. After I found the user, the suspected user, I will start to investigate the user activities, and we will see how to do it in the next slides.
So thanks, Karina. And moving on to another widely used initial access technique, which is phishing. This is where attackers usually send phishing messages attached with malicious link or files to execute malicious code on victims' devices, to distribute malware, or just to steal corporate credentials. And it's important to say that there are many methods to look for phishing threats and websites from CTI aspect. This includes some public searches based on the company logo, website source code, or name permutation of company assets that are likely to be mimicked in such a targeted phishing attack, also known as spear phishing. But today I want to discuss about a particular phishing detection method that proved itself as efficient during the investigation. But first, we need to understand how the attackers actually perceive the current phishing landscape in order to deep dive into it. So let's start. First, important to say that attackers nowadays continuously abandoning the approach of creating phishing websites manually and shifting into a more dynamic tool known as phishing kit. This tool enables them to target a variety of users and generate phishing websites and links by a single click. This tool is vastly offered for sale and shared in underground communities and marketplaces. And it's important to say that the phishing links which are generated using the phishing kit usually aimed at leading targets into a credential harvesting login panel and phishing websites. And these links usually include a URL parameter that defines the targeted email address. This targeted email address will also appear when the actual user access the fake login panel, and it is used to increase the reliability of the phishing websites. And another thing you need to know is that attackers are aware of the fact that many of our security solutions rely on virus total detection to identify malicious files and URLs. This understanding leads them to check the detection status of their phishing links before actually using them against the target. They do so to ensure that the links are fully undetected and won't raise any red flag while used. So both of these facts actually creates good detection opportunities for CTI team, because customized virus total queries for URLs that contain the company mail domain within them can be used to discover fully undetected phishing links that were submitted and searched within the platform. So during the investigation of the attack, this query actually yielded some interesting results of fully undetected phishing links that led for credential harvesting login panels that targeted several company employees. In the examples in front of you, you can see the fully undetected phishing link where the email URL parameter actually contains the targeted email address. As you can see, 0 out of 93 PT vendors identify this link as malicious. And you can see the phishing website, which is accessed when the user click the link, where the targeted email address is actually filled out automatically when the user access it. So by this, CTI team can provide Karina and the threat hunters with some relevant observable for this particular threats. This can include a list of the targeted employees by the phishing threat, but also the domains, URL, and IP addresses associated with the phishing websites and infrastructure. Let's move on.
Following Asaf's remarks, we have different leads from the CTI team, and let's see how we use them in the hunting. We will use again the firewall logs, we already talked about them. And again, we will hunt for network activity, same as we did before, but now we will not focus on a specific port because I want to cover all the network traffic, inbound and outbound communication. From the proxy logs perspective, all network traffic flowing out of the network should be passing through the proxy. And this type of logs typically provide a rich repository of metadata. And that's also why proxy logs is a great resource for threat hunting. So in this case, the domain could be hunted in the proxy logs. From both of these logs, we can extract the host name, the username, and the timestamp. And we will use the timestamp because of two reasons. The first one is I want to know that the event I found is related to my investigation. When we're hunting, usually we can see a lot of false positives and a lot of events. So I want to filter them out. And the second reason is because I can compare the time that I saw in the event to the time that Asaf saw in the VT. And the time frames should be close to each other because if they're related to the same attack, the time frames be close to each other. So with the information I found, I will use it into the next step, and we will take the username and the timestamp, and we will search in email security product. There we can see if there are additional users that also clicked on this URL, and it helps me to understand the scope of the attack. A phishing email could include a malicious link or malicious attachment. So in case of malicious attachment, we will need to perform endpoint investigation because I want to know what happened after the user downloaded the attachment or executed the attachment. But in our case, we're talking about the URL because this is the lead from the CTI team. And it's important to understand how many users actually clicked on the received email. For example, if we will find that many users received this suspicious email but did not click on it, we can ask the IT team to access the email server and delete the suspicious email. Also, I know what is the scope of the attack. And the other option, in case we don't have email security products, so we can use the EDR, and we will query the EDR, the browsing history of the EDR, and in the same way we can check if the user clicked on the suspicious URL or not. And in case of yes, so we will do the same actions as before. We will need to do endpoint investigation.
So thanks, Karina. Moving to another notable initial access technique in ransomware operation, and it is wide accounts. So as part of this tactic, attackers actually steal and abuse corporate credentials of existing accounts to access into internal networks. They especially targeting in these activities privileged users such as admins that will enable them to operate more freely within the environment and conduct high privilege actions. So how the attacker actually obtain these credentials? So attackers can obtain valid corporate credentials, as said, by conducting targeted phishing attacks, spear phishing attacks. But also valid credentials might be leaked when a certain service suffers a data breach, which exposes valid user credentials. And unfortunately, this situation happens all the time. Threat actors usually collect and share a list of leaked credentials in the underground community on a daily or even hourly basis. So when an employee actually sign up into a third-party service using their corporate credentials, a data breach against this service will enable the attackers to actually obtain valid corporate credentials, which can also be used to access the company's internal network. So CTI team can address this threat by extracting lists of leaked credentials from dark and clear web sources, while focusing on leaked users with high privileges, such as admins, and users that were leaked with a clear text password. So this is a good lead for focus hunting session for Karina and her team.
In case of leaked credentials, our assumption will be that this user will do suspicious or irregular activity. User is a pretty wide lead, and in this case, we will use more log sources to cover different security perspectives. It's important to say that all of those leads can be hunted in many different log sources, and in this session, we will not cover all the options and all the possibilities, but I want to show you the way of thinking and also to convey the logic of using leads within the hunting work. So let's start from the basic. The best way to search for suspicious user behavior is using the EDR platform, endpoint detection and response. The approach of the EDR is to monitor in a real time the endpoints and also to provide a visibility into what's happening on the endpoint. So we can hunt for general suspicious activity that was done by the user. The suspicious command lines, for example, could be suspicious PowerShell, suspicious WMI commands, or reconnaissance commands. Also, we will use the EDR to check for recent alerts related to this user. Sometimes attacks happen in different stages. For example, reconnaissance can happen a day or two before the attack or the encryption itself. So we would like also to see the last few days and to look for alerts that could be relevant for the user that is part of this investigation. And another point of view in a user is the logging activities. When we're talking about logging activities, I will hunt for logging out of business hours. Here, we would like to split it into three different aspects. The first aspect will be connecting to the organizational apps at odd hours. For example, it could be connecting to SharePoint or to Google Drive or even to the email. And the second aspect talks about connecting into the endpoint when the user is logging into his computer. The third aspect is hunting for suspicious network activity. And in this case, I will use VPN logs in order to understand if there were suspicious geolocation connections. For example, if my organization is from US and I will see many connections from Russia or from Europe, so it could be a red flag. When hunting for a single event of one of those types, it's not necessarily be suspicious because user can log in after working hours and it also could be a legitimate activity. So how can I detect suspicious activity? Here we can do correlation between several events. For example, let's think about it, connecting outside of working hours and also connecting from suspicious locations. That's something that could be suspicious. Therefore, when we are hunting, it's important to correlate between different events and try to see the full picture and not only rely on a single event.
Thanks, Karina, again. And the last initial access technique we're going to explore this session is the exploit of public-facing application. This is when threat actor attempt to exploit a certain vulnerability in an internet-facing website, service, or application in order to gain initial access into corporate environments. And it's important to understand that since new CVEs and vulnerabilities are discovered daily, global organizations might struggle to maintain consistent patching activities. And since POC exploits are shared by both security professionals and threat actors, and the POC themselves can be found very easily online, the condition actually creates an extremely fertile ground for the attackers to exploit these technologies. So here, once again, CTI team can leverage costume queries in tools such as Google Dorkin, Shodan, or Census to discover public-facing applications with vulnerable software. The focus here can be on commonly exploited CVEs in external remote services, such as known VPN vulnerabilities. A good example can be seen in front of you, the critical vulnerabilities in Citrix ADC and Pulse Connect Secure are continuously exploited in ransomware operations today. And these queries, the costume showdown and standard queries should combine a search for specific client asset. Here you can see the SSL operator within the query, but also a search for asset vulnerable to the CVE based on the actual exploit. So you can see the HTML attribute, which contain also what can be seen within the URL of the Pulse Connect Secure. So once a vulnerable public-facing application is actually detected, we can now provide the threat hunters with the relevant IP addresses of these vulnerable machines, together with the CVE IDs and exploitation AOAs for further analysis and internal hunting sessions.
So there is no one right way or guidelines how to hunt for CVE, because each CVE has different POC and different behaviors. And I want to continue with the example that Asaf talked about, and let's look at this CVE. This CVE is a vulnerability in a full secure VPN. Basically, it allows to send malicious HTTP requests in order to access the files on the targeted device. In the left side, you can see the proof of concept of the CVE. This is also I received from the CTI team, and we need it because it's important to understand what the CVE is using in the vulnerability. What is the IOAs and what is the behaviors? We can see the payload and the header that it used. And in this case, I saw many different payloads. They're marked in yellow, and I want to cover them all in my hunting. Actually, we don't need to do many different queries to cover all those payloads because we can create a regular expression, and then one query will cover them all. So because this vulnerability is in a VPN, I will use the VPN logs and search for the header and for the regex that I created, which represents the different payloads. In case I don't have VPN logs, so it's also possible to use proxy logs or firewall logs. And as I said, and this is the most important point, the hunting steps in this case will be dependent on the CVE itself, and it will be dependent on the log sources that we need to use here.
Thank you, Karina. Moving forward to the next tactic we're going to explore. Let's talk about data exfiltration. So simply, as previously mentioned, also in other session, this tactic consists of various techniques that enables attackers to steal data outside of a compromised network. And this is actually a highly common tactic in today's ransomware operation that is utilized in almost all attacks. Because it actually creates another strong leverage that forces organization into paying the demanded ransom. So actually it was also mentioned, but before encrypting the network, attackers first exfiltrate corporate data to external resources and threaten the victims that if the ransom won't be paid, the data will be leaked and published in dedicated Tor leak sites. As mentioned, this technique is known as the double extortion technique. And because this kind of leakage might extremely damage the company business operation, their reputation, and create some regulation issues, many organizations have no choice rather than paying the ransom. So in order to understand the actual impact of the attack, the SOC teams focus their efforts on checking whether the attacker was actually able to exfiltrate data outside of the network. So data exfiltration techniques that were potentially used during a ransomware attack can be discovered by the DFIR teams doing static or dynamic analysis of the ransomware payload that were found on the infected and encrypted workstations. These payloads usually include the actual functions that are used to exfiltrate the data from the network. So until the DFIR analysis is completed, CTI teams can focus and accelerate the incident response by tracking recent analysis reports of ransomware operation and previous attacks. you need to understand that a single campaign of a specific ransomware operation usually consists of several attacks. Usually the exfiltration tools operate the same, and we can analyze previous attacks to understand what we should actually look for. So once we track the potentially used exfiltration tool, we can now focus Karina and the threat hunters on specific observable and methods that are likely to be involved in such traffic, including the protocols, ports, and URL patterns on CNC server that are likely to be observed and involved, but also some command line arguments that are likely to be used by the exfiltration tool, which can actually assist the hunters in detecting specific hosts and endpoints that attempted to exfiltrate the data outside of the organization.
Thanks, Asaf. So this technique will come down to the types of the tools, and also about the visibility we have in our own environment. Now I will talk about how to use CTI Leads in exfiltration hunting. Here is some examples how to hunt for transfer data. It's important to notice that exfiltration could be done over different ports and different protocols, but in most of the cases, we will search for the transferred bytes. Firewall logs could be used for detection if they provide the transfer byte information. In case we don't have enough visibility, let's look at this example. We can aggregate port 53. Port 53 is a DNS port. Actually, this port was marked by the CTI team in our incident, and it's also a very common port for exfiltration. So what we're going to do is to aggregate port 53 traffic by the IP address, and then we will calculate the sum of the bytes sent. Then we will create a list of top sources or source IPs by byte sent. And usually the values should be close to each other, and if not, we will find a suspicious IP address. The same way we can use for the proxy logs as well. Proxy logs could be used for exfiltration over HTTP or HTTP channels. And maybe in this case, we will need to exclude some traffic that belongs to specific web categories to filter out the false positives. Exfiltration also could be performed by command line, using of tools, automated tools for exfiltration. In this case, we will hunt for the command lines in the EDR. If we will find the host that executed or used those tools in a command line, so it can assist us to detect the endpoints that were involved in this incident. And from now on, we will focus on those hosts. So you can see here two examples for those tools, rclone and megasync. It's just an example for automated tools for exfiltration. And another way to look for when it comes to data exfiltration, we can search for creation of archived files with extension like RAR or 7-zip or tar, because sometimes in exfiltration technique, we will see creation of archived files. Also, we can hunt for use of protocols such as FTP, SFTP, or SSH. Those protocols also very common for exfiltration. And the last thing we can hunt for is Tor traffic or Tor domains. And in general, there are many different ways to do exfiltration. And now I want to show you more ways how to hunt for exfiltration, even without using CTI Leads. So data exfiltration could be divided into two main categories: outsiders that are trying to infiltrate the network to steal valuable corporate data, or people from the inside willing to share the valuable data. Exfiltration also could be done by download or upload to external cloud services, such as Google Drive or Dropbox, or even emailing it out. In the previous slide, I mentioned that exfiltration could be used with command lines, and I mentioned the megasync tool. Here, we're looking for the same tool, but from different perspectives, because now I want to hunt for the upload itself using the mega tool. Another option for exfiltration is using physical devices to download the data. We can use USB or smartphones, and in this case, we will suspect as insider. But in all those cases, what we need to look for is for large number of files that are being uploaded or downloaded or copied. So the last exfiltration technique that I want to talk about is exfiltration over email. It's obvious that when we're talking about email, I can use the email gateway log. But I want to show you another way with different queries, how I can combine between different queries and also to hunt for exfiltration technique. So we will use the EDR and we will perform a hunt for additional techniques, such as we can search for copying information to different location that is not drive C, or transferring data to USB, and many more other examples. But here you can see an example to exfiltration over email. Actually, this query is combined from two different internal queries. One of them is looking for creating archived files, which I mentioned before, archived files such as RAR or 7-zip. And the other query is looking for emails that send outside the corporate domain. And by combining these two queries, we can suspect for exfiltration.
Thanks, Karina. And for this case, we got some insights regarding the exfiltration. In our case, we saw that the data was not able to actually, the traffic was actually denied, and the data was not allowed to pass. But in this case, CTI team should validate our assumption regarding exfiltration to ensure that we didn't miss anything. And in this case, we can monitor for the relevant Tor leak sites for new victims and expose data. We already mentioned that as part of the double extortion technique, the attackers steal the information and upload it to dedicated Tor leak sites. So now we're gonna monitor these leak sites closely. We will also want to prepare the organization to the worst case scenario, that the data was actually able to pass and the traffic was allowed. And in this case, we can provide some additional decision-making information, including the average ransomware amounts for the ransomware as a service group for this specific group. We can focus on the organizational size of the client and the sector and countries of activity. We can also use virus total queries, virus total hunting to detect similar files to the files we actually found within the environments. Detecting specific things within this file and look for them in virus total can expose more similar files. And using this, we can discover other victims that were attacked by the same threat group. That can assist and understand the scope of the attacks and the targeted sectors and countries. But we also can use these similar files to understand the time frames in which these files were actually uploaded into VT, which represents the time that the organization was attacked, and compare it to the stolen data, the time in which the stolen data was published by the attacker. This can assist in understanding what should we expect for in the worst case. So now we already discussed about this multiple types of observables, all the noise, and understanding how to connect between these external CTI leads to the relevant source logs. And now we can see how it's all get organized together via predefined strategy. So now we want to cover some conclusions and discuss about some takeaways from this session. So first, you need to invest more time in IOA detection opportunities both in detection and prevention aspects, especially when it's come to ransomware, because as mentioned, ransomware operation use customized, unique payloads and network infrastructure for each victim, meaning that implemented IOCs won't be enough to protect the organization from an attack from the same threat group. So this should be kept in mind. Also, when it comes to initial access and other ransomware tactics, it is crucial to rely on the most common MITRE ATT&CK TTPs, because tracking only specific TTPs for initial access won't be relevant to detect the actual source of the attack. You should also be aware that attackers adjust their TTPs based on our security approaches. If they know that we are monitoring for phishing websites using a name permutation of the assets, they're going to use dynamic phishing kits in order to evade detection. If they know that you are using Virus Total to check the detection status of their malicious files, so they're going to check the detection status before actually using this file. So this understanding should be kept in mind and leveraged by us to find the gaps that we can't actually detect and discover. Fourth, we want to say that hunting efforts are much more efficient when focused and based on CTI Leads. Searching for something that you know what you want to find compared to searching for something you don't know what you should find is the best example for this. Unless worth mentioning and saying that CTI and threat hunting collaboration will accelerate IR procedures during ransomware investigation. This collaboration is very important and crucial to accelerate the procedures when the time is actually very short and real decision need to be made. So thank you everyone for joining today's session. Thank you, Karina. Yeah, any question?
Yeah, I think we do have another couple of minutes. So let's take a couple of questions if we can. Actually, someone Marius asked a question early in the session. Does Microsoft ATP security portal count as collecting threat intel data? What's your view on that?
Of course, in our covering of different sources and threat intel, we actually relying on a lot of sources to ensure we're covering all. So yeah, actually it is.
I see, Karina, you're agreeing. So
yeah,
good. Okay,
exactly.
Great. Okay, so Karina, let's another question that came in. When threat hunting is used in a ransomware incident, are there ways that threat hunters can use automation in order to make investigations more efficient?
Yeah. So thank you for the question. First of all, I will start by saying that there are some ways to optimize the hunting work. The hunting approach in general is a proactive approach. We're searching within a lot of data, a lot of logs, and therefore I think that we must have elements of automation in order to make the hunts to be more efficient. I will give some examples of things that can be done for more efficient hunts. So for example, we as a hunting team, we have a rich repository of queries that could be suitable for different kinds of platforms, security platforms, because we as an MSSP company, we have a lot of different customers with different security platforms. So we have to keep pool of queries for different techniques. And when we start to handle an incident, we come with the set of tools ready. For example, I have queries for many different techniques performed by different attackers. And if I had a lead from the CTI, so it also could be efficient the hunt, I will just put it into my query and also cross-reference the data. It's possible to prepare the queries based on different incidents. based on different attack types, queries for ransomware behaviors or queries for phishing attacks. And also based on different techniques, as we talked about, some of them in this session, initial access or even for persistence queries. And besides that, I think that also we can use some tools and scripts that also could be executed on the endpoints while investigation during an incident. And with those tools also we can extract meaningful data. And that's it. I hope
Okay.
I answered.
Sure, thank you. All right, more of a general question, Asaf, if I may. What do you think is, in terms of ransomware, what do you think? What's your take on future trends? What can we expect in the next, I don't know, 2 to 5 years? Do you think it's who's going to be winning out, and where do you see ransomware going?
So hopefully us gonna win in the situation. But it's a great question because in the CTI team we're actually continuously tracking the ransomware landscape for any development to understand how we should react to this situation. But the first thing I want to say in this regard that should be acknowledged is that ransomware attacks basically react to our approaches and to the trends that succeeds by other ransomware groups. So when it comes to our approaches, they also try to leverage efficient techniques. So in the first place, there were encrypting networks, and then we came up with separate backups and restore the files without their need. And they came up with the double extortion technique. It started to exfiltrate the data before encrypting it and threaten in publishing it publicly. And then we came up for stronger detection and prevention rules to block and deny this kind of traffic, hopefully. Next, as also mentioned in previous sessions, they came up with a triple extortion technique, where they are trying to, they are threatening organization in conducting distributed denial of service attack, DDoS attacks against the compromised infrastructure to damage it more seriously. So they are basically reacts to our approaches. This is also related to our vast move into the cloud. So these resources are actually already very targeted, and we anticipated that they will continue to be. Also the IT infrastructure that is used to run these cloud resources. Also regarding being impressed for other successful attempts of other ransomware groups and other threat groups in general. So I can say that ransomware operator and the whole dark web community was really impressed from the SolarWind supply chain attack. The ability to target and gain initial access into so many corporate networks using by infecting one single driver, legitimate driver, really thrilled the attackers. So we really take into account to see more and more attempts to leverage supply chain attacks in widely deployed technologies in order to gain initial access in future ransomware operations. Yeah, I think this is my answer.
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate your time. It's